Honeybees, also known as pollinators, add $217 billion to the global economy. Joining us today on Newsmakers is Valerie Nichols with the Missouri State Beekeepers Association to talk about what an indispensable part of the U.S. economy honeybees are. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Bobby.
So tell us what the Missouri State Beekeepers Association is.
It's a major organization inside of the state of Missouri. We have a little less than 200 or 600 members inside the state. We have two major conferences in the spring, and in the fall we kind of float around throughout the state so people in the Southwest can go and have the luxury of having the conference there by them. We try to travel up to the north and have people there that can partake in it. So we get into major people, scientists, people that work in labs, major speakers and writing articles in newsletters, of magazines, it's a multitude of people that we can pull into these conferences and educate people even further than just reading a magazine. You're actually listening to the person who wrote it. So that's the beauty of having a state organization of that magnitude.
Mm-hmm. And so your mission is to educate people about bees?
Yes, that's the mission statement, and a lot of clubs will have that same mission statement to educate the general public, educate them on bees, their importance, and how important they are to just everything you do.
Yeah, I had no idea until I started doing a little research about how important they are. Talk about the grant you all recently received.
Yeah, we recently received a $25,000 grant from Missouri Department of Agriculture, and this grant can be dispensed out to, we're hoping, at a minimum of 25 clubs inside the state, which there is roughly a little over 50 clubs inside the state of Missouri. So we're hoping to get at least 25 clubs involved in this. A lot can benefit from this for these clubs. If they have a library of books, magazines, we can increase that library for their individual club. Banners, brochures, all of these can be used whenever they attend an outing or an event where they're trying to express how the importance of honey is. And also a data projector. Unfortunately, there are some clubs that meet in a garage and they don't have access to anything, that they could project a PowerPoint presentation onto. So that's one of the things too that these clubs can benefit from this grant.
Wow. And so it's springtime and flowers, trees, everything's blooming. What does that mean for the bees?
Well, unfortunately, this year's kind of shaping up like it has in the past, where it seems like it rains and it rains and it rains, and all of a sudden, just here in the last few days, we've actually felt like what summer feels like, and humidity. So we're running about 3 weeks behind. The plants continue to grow and produce nectar and pollen, but unfortunately the bees, whenever it rains like it has been, they don't like to get out and get their fluff wet.
Oh, sure.
So it continues on even without the bees, but then whenever things break loose, like it is right now, man, they are absolutely out there loading up everything they possibly can. So what we call the honey flow is actually starting as we speak.
Okay.
With everything blooming, and they're pulling in honey for us to consume, for them to get through the winter in. So all that's going on right now.
Wow. I mean, it's just a big process that I don't think, I couldn't wrap my head around it. Talk about how crucial these bees are to our economy.
Oh, the economy, one of the big things out in the state of California is the almond fields. That's generally where a commercial beekeeper starts out at in the early February timeline, and they're pollinating the almonds. And if you've ever bought a bag of almonds, you know how expensive they are. And
Sure.
An almond pollination contract for one hive can go somewhere around $200 a hive. So you've got a whole trailer load of bees. That's quite a bit of money, for that commercial beekeeper. Then once they move out of the almond fields, they're kind of maybe going back to a southern state to rest. Also maybe to split their hives in two, to sell, to populate. Then they're going to go moving north to Washington, to apples, and then maybe on over to North Dakota, South Dakota, to the rape fields, canola, your berries, brambles, so the bees are moving around quite a bit. Does it put a lot of stress on these hives? Absolutely, you betcha. That's on the commercial aspect of it. You know, a hobbyist like myself running 100 hives, I don't move my bees.
Sure.
So I don't get into that aspect of it.
So when you say that they pollinate, so a person who owns the bees basically packs them up and takes them to an almond orchard.
Yep, absolutely.
And just turns them loose.
Yeah,
How does that work?
you're not really turning them loose. I mean, each hive around that time of the year will probably have around 20 to 30,000 bees. For us in the middle of June, in the height, we might be looking at 60,000 bees. So they're taking each hive on what they can, like a 4-way pallet or a 6-way pallet. Forklift picks them up, puts them on a trailer. They transport them to the state of California, offload them, let's say a hive per acre or 2 an acre, and they're setting these bees in an appropriate spot, and the bees are just out there doing what they need to be doing, and that's pollinating the almonds.
And then they come back to the hive?
Then
Like,
they pick
how do
them-
they
yep.
know that?
Well, a lot of them get lost. Maybe they'll get into the wrong hive. You know, as long as a bee's bringing something in, they're welcomed with arms. But they start taking things out of there, then they're probably going to get their little butt chewed.
That's funny.
Yeah.
I wouldn't even imagine.
But they can kind of coexist if they get into the wrong hive, like I said, under those standards of, you know, you're bringing something in, you're welcome. If you're taking something out, it's probably going to be an issue for them.
And what would they take out?
Well, like resources, nectar, pollen.
Oh, okay.
You know, if maybe they're robbing out a hive. If a hive decides to get weak for whatever reason, and they're like, oh, here's an opportunity, I can go in there and get that and take it over to my hive. So that might be
so funny that you would think that they think like people.
Oh,
You know,
yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
highly intelligent, I guess.
Oh, they are. They're all women.
There you go. I like that. I like that a lot. So they do crop pollination. Do all countries in the world, I guess, handle bees in the same way? Like, do they have the same type of activity?
Yes, different races of bees, you know, have different qualities. Of course, everybody heard about the killer bees, you know, that whenever they came over and, oh, it's got to be, everybody's watched the Killer Bee movie, you know, and they see a swarm of bees and they're like, oh, you know, we got to get the kids in, the dogs in, you know, wrangle up the horses and everything. It's not that bad. And being in the Midwest, we're not subjected to it like, say, Texas or Arizona or Nevada, you know, where you're...
Southern California.
Southern California, absolutely. You bet. Those states are a little more apt to have the killer bees, Africanized.
Well, and that was one of my questions. I grew up in Southern California, and when the first movie came out, you know, then we were all terrified as, you know, little preteen kids, you know, little toddlers running around, you know, terrified that these bees were going to kill us, because obviously we'd heard, there was talk about the movies, but like you said, it's not like that.
Nope. You know, those Africanized bees have a lot of good qualities. They are excellent honey producers. They are resistant to a lot of the diseases. Unfortunately, the Apis mellifera is not resistant to. So there are some qualities in that. And if people buy bees from Southern California or let's say Southern State queen breeders, then they are subjected to possibly having some genetics that come from the Africanized bees. So sometimes that's not such a bad thing.
Sure.
Yeah, they can be a little more aggressive. You're definitely going to suit up and use a lot of smoke around something like that. So you just know that you got to suit up a little bit more, say, than somebody in the northern states, North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming, something like that, where you're not going to have that.
Well, because they can't live in the colder climates, is that right?
They're more of a southern state, like that humidity, you know, kind of bee. So,
how can you tell the difference between?
Really, you can't.
Okay.
If they were sitting side by side, even with a trained eye, it would be very difficult to determine the difference between the two.
So how would you then know? Like,
Probably
I guess,
having it
unless
tested.
Unless it stung you.
Unless the whole hive, you know, starts to come at you while you're, you know, out on your lawnmower and it just fogs you. That'd be a pretty good indication that it's got an issue.
How about like that?
Yep.
So how do you identify a queen bee?
What I always, whenever I teach the classes, I always kind of say the queen is like your thumb compared to your pinky. There's a world of difference between the two. She has a long abdomen, thorax. She she is the sole thing for the hive itself. Without her, your numbers are going to drop. She has one role, not to just wear the crown, but to also, she's the one that's going to lay 1,500, 2,000 eggs a day.
Oh, wow.
So without her, you have nothing. Your hive numbers are going to start depleting.
Wow.
So you can tell her, it's kind of tough as a new beekeeper. They
Sure.
go in there and they're like, I got to find the queen. I got to find the queen. And, you know, that's not your sole reason why you get into a hive is to find the queen. Yeah, you want to see her, but, you know, I can go into lots of hives and never see her, but I'm not there to just see her specifically.
Sure.
I want to see what she is doing inside of that hive that tells me whether or not she's a good queen or a bad queen.
And that's by identifying new
Eggs.
Uh-huh.
Exactly, eggs
Okay.
that she has laid.
Wow.
And her, what we call a brood pattern, how her pattern looks on a frame, how well she's laying on that frame itself.
Okay. And so they bring back food for her?
Yes, she doesn't feed herself.
Right.
They feed her. They groom her, they feed her. Like I said, she has one job, and that's a baby laying
Right.
machine.
Man, just like seeing a queen in the movies, you
Yep.
know, it's
Yep.
it's very glamorous. So there are different roles that these bees play in the hives.
Exactly.
What are those different roles?
So when a bee is laid, let's say a worker bee, which is females, and the majority of your bees that are in that hive are all females. You will have a percentage of drones, which are the male. The role of the male has one purpose too, and that's to breed the queen. Unfortunately, if he gets that lucky job, he dies.
Sure.
You know, through that mating session. And so they really don't do anything. We kind of tease in the beginning beekeeping classes that those males don't do anything but sit around, drink coffee, and read the newspaper. They don't collect pollen. They don't collect nectar.
Right.
They don't have anything to do other than one job. And if they did that, then I guess they're not going to come back to the hive. But the majority of those bees that are in those hives are all females. So when from egg to emergence is 21 days on a female worker. So her first job is to basically start cleaning house, cleaning out the cell where the queen is laid, polishing that up, cleaning out anything that might be left behind from the last bee that emerged. Then they kind of move into the next job of taking any debris out that's foreign inside the hive. And then they kind of quickly move into a forage bee where they're actually going out and collecting the nectar and pollen out in the field. So then those are called the field bees.
Okay.
And, you know, when things are at the peak, like we're getting ready to start approaching, then, you know, a worker bee will live maybe 30 to 40 days. So she's basically flying her wings off. And that's what is the end of life for them.
Really?
Whereas in the wintertime, they're not doing anything except sitting around and kind of keeping the queen warm and keeping the little bit of brood warm that she has laid. They may live three months because they're not doing anything.
I had no idea that bees only had that short of a life.
Very short
span.
time.
Yeah.
That's why it's so important to have a good laying queen
Sure.
that can produce that 1,500 to 2,000 eggs a day and get
you're
up to
gonna
that.
lose.
Yeah.
Oh,
You're,
okay.
you're losing as many, well, you're losing more than what you are bringing in.
Oh, okay.
But you got to keep that balance in there during that time of the year.
And that's why it's so important, right? When you see a swarm of bees, to notify. What do people need to do
Absolutely.
when they see that?
So everybody inside the state, the Missouri State Beekeepers has a swarm list. And if you can't remember what your local club is, you can call your extension office, police department, conservation department. Also just Google local club, local beekeeping clubs in your area. You could go to the state association site and you click on local clubs, and every club that's inside that state has a little push pin dot on top of the club. And wherever you're at, you can go to that site, click on it, and it will tell you all the information about that local club, email, phone number, who to contact, and you can contact that particular club and they will send out a swarm list or they will look at their swarm list and actually get a person that's in the area.
Okay.
So right now we're taking probably 5, 6, 7 phone calls a day for swarm calls.
Oh, okay.
Because last week, whenever it was so rainy, all week long, they stayed closed up. It'd be like you sitting in a tent with 10 kids. You can only imagine how you'd feel
yeah, I can't
by
get that
that.
mental picture right now.
So then whenever, you know, the first pop of sun comes out and a little bit of warmth, boy, those bees are just hitting those trees. And then if people don't call, unfortunately, those bees go into places that we as beekeepers don't like to have them get. A ceiling joist, a floor joist.
Oh, gotcha.
In behind a chimney, something, a dryer vent, something where just the average beekeeper doesn't go out and just flicks the swarm off of a limb and into the box, but rather they have to become a construction consultant and remove who knows what. So yes, it's very important that when you see a swarm, call. Don't wait 2 or 3 days thinking, oh, they're going to move
Go away,
on
right.
and they're going to be all right. Unfortunately, about 20% of our swarms that hit the trees, they don't survive.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's too bad.
Well, 20% of them actually survive, let's put it that way. 80%
yeah.
do not. We're faced with a lot of different parasites, diseases, and there's nobody there to take care of those things. So whenever they go into a tree, a cavity of a tree, there's nobody there to come around and give each one of them a little shot, of something.
Right,
And
immunize them.
Yep.
So what are some of the top threats? You said diseases. What about pesticides?
Pesticides, neonicotinoids that's a sin against a beekeeper. And so you got to have that working relationship with a farmer. If somebody, let's just go back to the pollination of the almond fields. That is a heavily pesticide-ridden place.
Sure.
And, whenever you have a substance as our wax that is so absorbent, and that queen lays in that absorbent material after that bee has visited a plant that has been sprayed with something, then what's happening to those future bees that's inside of that cell? So our bees are like the canaries in the cave. If we start losing our bees, what's happening to us?
Sure.
The plants we eat has been sprayed with that neonicotinoid. I know I probably butchered it, but that kind of gets the gist of it. It's a harsh chemical that the bees have to, well, I say get along with, but we'd like to say we couldn't get along with it.
Sure.
And it wouldn't happen. So that's one of the big things, but really the number one thing that as a beekeeper, we have a mite. And it unfortunately it carries a lot of parasites in it and diseases, and that attacks that bee. So that's one of our biggest combat that we have against keeping bees alive anymore is this mite. So that's where our research goes on and, paying money to those people to keep the research going, how we can build the super bee that is mite resistant. We'd like to say that, could happen.
Sure.
Yeah.
So right now with all the flowers and the trees, everything's blooming and farmers are planting. So would your normal wheat farmer, because Kansas has a lot, and corn, do they spray pesticides on that are harmful to the bees, or is that just the bigger operations that we're talking
your big
about?
operations, and the thing about monocultures, one thing. If you had one thing on your plate that you had to eat every single day, how boring would that be?
Right.
So our bees are only getting into that one type of culture, and we're also seeing that more farmers are planting the soybeans, corn. Those are two main things that are, we won't even get into GMOs, genetically modified. I mean, that could be a whole nother 30 minutes of, of boring conversation. But unfortunately, that is what's happening is our row crops are becoming our monocultures. That's one thing. So that is not a good variety for the bees. Pollen, nectar, boring. But unfortunately, that's where we're heading.
Sure. So what can you or me or an individual who plants flowers or a garden, what can we plant that can help the local bee?
Things like bee balm, purslane, Russian sage, salvia. Those are all things that you can go down to your local greenhouse and purchase. They're not going to make a difference in, say, I want to have a particular honey. In order to get a particular style of honey, like clover or alfalfa. You're going to have large fields in order to have that particular one. So we, as just a hobbyist beekeeper, we kind of label ours as a wildflower honey.
Okay.
That way, it's a wide variety. But you know, one of the biggest things that I tell people, if they want to do something, don't spray. Absolutely, don't spray your dandelions. Bees absolutely love dandelions in the spring. It's a great source of nectar. Henbit, dead nettle, all of those things are great sources, but people are like, oh, there are weeds in my yard. I've got to go out there and spray, you know, and get rid of that. Keep them there.
Sure.
You know, so sometimes I kind of get into this, I don't know if I should go down this road or not, but there's a certain side of one town that sprays because they want that nice green, luscious grass, like a golf course. And then there's another side of town where they're like, we're not going to spray. We're not going to do that.
Right.
You know, we're barely going to mow our grass. Okay, that's fine. You bet.
Right.
I would prefer to have my bees on that side of town where they're not going to spray and maybe they're not going to mow. My bees will do 20 times better than they will down there where, you know, you've got somebody that has a chemical company come out and spray their, you know, every 3 weeks or whatever and fertilize and
Yeah.
So.
Well, so I have every year, I have rose bushes and those little tiny June beetles is what I call them, but I know there's something else. Japanese beetles, maybe the small ones, small green iridescent ones.
Yep.
Eat the life out of my roses. And I have learned that I can spray like Dawn dishwashing liquid.
Yep.
And that doesn't necessarily hurt the bees, or is that still kind of like too much?
Yeah, you're kind of crossing into that. I just pick them off and throw them in my I usually have a garden every year, and okra is one of the things that those Japanese beetles love. And I'm going out through there. Yeah, it's laborious, but I'm going out through there and I'm picking them off as much as I can and throw them, either squish them or try to throw them down into something, your Dawn dishwashing liquid or, you know, something to that. There are a lot of organic, homeopathic type, and I hate to use the words chemicals or
recipes
exactly that you can use that do not hurt the bees.
Okay.
Also, staying away from your powdered, like Seven Dust.
Diatomaceous earth.
Diatomaceous earth is great.
Oh, okay.
You bet. We use that sometimes in the bottom of our hives, that there's a screen that the mites or anything else foreign can fall down into. So DE is a really good thing. Neem oil. You're kind of getting into the sketchy
chemical type area.
Yep.
So do all bees sting? Should people be worried about that?
Yes and no. Not necessarily worry about it. You know, like we just talked about the killer bees. Yeah, they're going to be something that's going to sting you. But the thing about Apis mellifera, the honeybees that we know, they have a barbed stinger. So when they sting you, that barb stays in the skin. And unfortunately, yes, it's going to pull out the guts of the bee and the stingers. And they die, exactly.
So they don't want to sting you.
Right.
They know what's going to happen.
They know what's going to happen. So, you know, they're not as defensive as what you think.
Sure.
You know, in that respect, because they do know, if I sting, I'm going to die.
Right.
The drones can't sting. They can sting you, but they don't have sting. I say they can sting you. They do not have stingers.
Okay.
So, like a wasp or a yellow jacket or a hornet, they have a smooth stinger. So if they sting you once, they're going to
do it again.
Ding, ding, they're going to go at you again. Yeah.
And bees aren't like that.
No, they leave a pheromone back behind in your skin. So if you've been stung several times, like people as beekeepers do, then you're probably going to be stung back in that very same spot again. Because that pheromone's left behind there.
How about that?
Yeah.
Well, and some people are allergic to bee stings, right?
Yeah, and that's the thing. People say, I'm allergic to bees. And I'm like, well, tell me what your reactions are. Oh, I swell up and it itches the next day and it's really tender. That's a normal...
Right. That's not allergic.
That's a normal reaction. It's that anaphylactic shock and closing up the airways and... You know, your heart is beating 88 times more than what it should. You need that EpiPen, and your doctor tells you do not get stung again by that. And because you're allergic to a particular insect, a stinging insect, doesn't mean that you're allergic to bees. They all have different venoms.
Okay.
So it's not necessarily that you get stung by a bee, it's everybody.
And so when when beekeepers move a hive and you see them with smoke, what does the smoke do?
It's a trickery.
Okay.
It's a trickery that you're telling the bees, oh, hey, our house is on fire. We got to load up and get all the honey we can because we're going to be moving out of here. So in turn, by doing that, then they're filling up their guts with all of this honey, and they can't get their stinger around to sting you because they're so fat. So that's one of the reasons why you're using, and it smooths the hive down and kind of puts it on an even temperament there, so they're not as apt to sting you.
Kind of like a Prozac for bees.
Exactly what it is. You betcha. It zeroes them out, that's for sure.
Well, that's a good thing to know then. And so I guess the most important thing is call somebody if you see a swarm.
Absolutely.
Get online and your numbers are there.
You betcha.
And they can come out. And then is there a wrong way to respond? Like trying to, I mean, you shouldn't kill bees.
Right.
Is what I've learned. But
I hear that too from people whenever they call for a swarm. They're like, well, I told my husband I didn't want to go out there and, spray them with some sort of pesticide. We need those bees. And I'm like, kudos to you for saying that and thinking that. If more people had that attitude, we'd be a lot better off. So don't use the water hose or a pesticide or something like that, but just please call someone in your area to come and remove the bees. That way the beekeeper wins and the bees win.
And we win.
And we win.
As a society, because then we can keep eating food.
That's right. Yep. So you think about what you had for breakfast this morning. Did you have some sort of a wheat? Yeah, sure. That pollination was coming from a bee. Did you have some sort of greens on there that required some sort of pollination? Like you said earlier, 90% of our food that we eat is due to the pollination. 1 out of every 3 bites of food is due to the pollination of not necessarily a honeybee, but some sort of a pollinator, because there's lots of different pollinators out there. It doesn't just have to be a bumblebee or a carpenter bee or a honeybee. It can be things like a wasp,
birds,
a bat, a beetle, anything that's moving around and transporting over to a different flower to get that pollination.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for coming on.
You bet.
You provided some really good information. Thanks for joining us today. I want to thank Valerie Nichols with the Missouri State Beekeepers Association for joining us today. This is Newsmakers on KGCS TV from the Ruth Copeland Studios here at Missouri Southern State University, and I'm Bobby Potroff. We'll see you again soon.